My name is Sebastian Edwards, and I'm the director of the Center for Global Management. And I'd like to welcome you all to our first global policy meeting of this academic year, which is sponsored jointly between our center at the Anderson School and the Luskin Center at the Law School. Let me tell you a little bit about how this works, and then I'll introduce our superstar for the evening. We meet twice a year. If there are incredibly hot events going on, we meet once more. But we meet twice a year in this setting to discuss a particular issue that is of importance to the global economy and to global managers and lawyers and scholars. We have a speaker, or maybe two speakers, or a conversation between two people. And then we have a short, I'm going to emphasize short, Q&A session. And then there's dinner. And during dinner, each table discusses a question that is asked by the main speaker. So there's going to be a question posed to each table, and you discuss it among yourselves. And we've made an effort to have law students and Anderson students intermingled at the tables. And then you have to choose one of the people at the table as the spokesperson for that table. At the end, each spokesperson will briefly tell the rest of the group what was the answer or the conclusion that that table arrived at with respect to the question that was asked. And that's it. And then when the answers are provided, or the conclusions, the speaker comments a little bit on that, and then we say we usually stay a little bit after dinner to continue with the conversation. All right? So before introducing my good friend Ed Leamer, let me say one thing, one additional thing about the center. This is mostly directed to the management students, but I think that the students in the law school could also benefit from this. We at this center is the catalyst for anything and everything that is global at the Anderson School. We are here to serve the students with respect to any program, any question, any work that they want to do that involves global management or the global economy. And one thing that we do, besides sponsoring a number of events, like next Monday we're going to have the organizer of the Rio upcoming Olympics and Peter Uberoth, who organized the last LA Olympics, talk about what it is like organizing something like that amazing event, which is the Olympics. So we organize these events, these kind of dinners, but we also have brown bag discussion groups. And those events, we want you to tell us what you want to do. We have money. We have access to rooms. We know a lot of people. All we need are topics. And if you are in the law school and you think that there is a very important topic to be discussed, since you're going to be meeting Anderson students here, you can just let them know and we'll organize anything that you want to discuss about. Like when the Fed hikes and increases interest rates, whenever that happens, will the economy of Brazil collapse? The answer to that one is no, because it already collapsed, but that's a different story. Okay, so let me now introduce our speaker. Ed Leamer is one of our most senior professors here at Anderson. Very distinguished career. You can Google him if you haven't done that. So many of you went with him on the trip to Greece, which was, I hear, a lot of fun. I wish I had been there. And he's going to tell us about what's going on in Greece and the implications of the Greek crisis for management and for different companies. So let me ask Ed to step forward. He's going to make a presentation. You're gonna make a presentation, or I'm gonna ask you questions.
Whichever you prefer.
I'm gonna. Why don't you come? Why don't we sit over there? You're gonna tell us first about the trip. Why don't you tell us about the trip, and then you join me here,
great.
and I'll ask you difficult questions. Okay.
I'm ready. So I'm not a macroeconomist. Greece is all about the macroeconomy. This is the real expert when it comes to exchange rates and the macroeconomy. This isn't really my field. But I build up a huge amount of understanding about how the U.S. macroeconomy operates by teaching those MBA students year after year after year, discussing with them about their views about how the economy was operating. So what I'm saying is this is a classroom in which I'm not giving a kind of a core dump of my knowledge. We're working together. It's an experience in which we're working together in order to create knowledge. I build up a huge stock of knowledge, special knowledge about how the macroeconomy operates, and when the dean asked me to do the forecasting, I was ready to do that. And one of the slides I always have been putting up for years and years is this image here, which contrasts Pavlov in the upper left from Grandma in the lower right. So the Pavlovian trainer gives the dog a cookie at the right moment, and the dog by the end of the quarter is barking just at the right time. The grandma behaves entirely different here. Grandma is just trying to create a relatively safe environment for that child who is a natural learning machine to master the art of walking. So my view is that our classrooms are too much like the image on the upper left, which is training, and you got to recognize that training may have worked in 30 years ago in 1975 when I arrived at UCLA. Computers are way more trainable than you are. So if all you can do is memorize and regurgitate and carry out the programs that somebody else is creating for you, there's no jobs out there anymore for you. That's true in the law area, but all the professional services have exactly the same feature, which you have to be a creative, analytical, problem-solving person. You have to graduate not with knowledge, but a thirst for more knowledge and understanding how you create knowledge for yourself. And therefore, education should be more like Grandma, where Grandma creates the experiences where the student can learn. And then, well, I like to say you didn't give your grandmother a grade. You didn't give her a B because you didn't teach you well to learn how to walk. You didn't expect her to give you a lecture where she says, raise this foot and raise that foot. It's all experiential learning. So then, to follow on to the topic of today, the Greece experience, I was invited 3 or 4 years ago by Carla, who's somewhere in the back here, Carla Hain, who runs this global immersion program, which sends students around the globe in the context of a course where they're studying aspects of the country. And she'd been after me for a long time about doing one of these courses. I thought it'd be a lot of work and wasn't sure the rate of return would be high, and maybe there was lots of other things I could use to spend my time on. So every time I saw her in the hallway, I kind of looked like this. But just last year, she was able to create eye contact with me. And she regarded that as a contract. And she walked up to me and said, Greece. And I said, okay. But then the goal of this Greece program is to create an educational experience built around Greece. And I said, this is all about debt. Our business school students need to learn about debt. There's good debt, there's bad debt, and there's distressed debt. So in a distressed environment, there are all kinds of business opportunities that are created by that distress. But when you're in the midst of acquiring your own debt, you better worry about whether that's going to turn out to be distressed or not. So the course was about debt, not about Greece, and Greece was the country of an example of a highly indebted country. We start by looking at the debt inside the private debt inside the United States, which is housing debt. And you probably think 2008 and 2009 was distinctive, meaning that you had a big housing crisis. Almost all, we have 9 out of the last 11 recessions have been the same thing, where you have excessive building and housing fueled by very lax lending standards, and then you get in trouble, you have an economic downturn. It's something that individuals need to worry about, because I know you millennials don't want to buy a home, but if you do, you got to worry about the indebtedness relative to the home, whether that's going to get you in trouble the way it did with your parents or grandparents in 2008 or 2009. Businesses need to worry about the same thing. So we studied first the debt within the United States, and there's that great book, I guess you've all picked that up, called The House of Debt. That's one of the books that the students read in this class. Then we move on to Mexico. And the reason to look at the Mexican debt crisis is to explore the possibility that if Greece went on a drachma and could devalue their currency, would that be a favorable thing or not? We studied the Mexican setting, and the surprising thing is that the crisis of 1994 is kind of over within a year and a half or two at most, in the sense that industrial production had recovered, GDP had recovered, the unemployment is falling. And it all came from a depreciation of the value of the peso, which allowed Mexico to much more successfully export products to the United States and elsewhere around the globe. Makes you think that that might be a good thing when you got to the Greek environment. But I have to add that most of us who were in Greece, asking this question over and over to various people that were speaking to us, whether the drachma was a good idea or not, I think we all came away as a group thinking the drachma was not such a good idea, even though the Mexican situation might suggest it was. And then we move on to Greece. And what I'm trying to tell you is I learned a heck of a lot. I really learned a heck of a lot. And then when we got to, that was before we got to Greece, I had to create this program and create readings and do all the reading. And I can't tell you how many New York Times and Wall Street Journal articles I read in order to filter out ones that the students could read. They complained I gave them too many, but I gave them like 1 out of 20 or maybe 1 out of 100 that I was looking at. So that also is real life too, because you got to figure out in your scarce time what's worth spending time on and what's not. You got to decide which of these things you want to look at. So I way overloaded them. Fortunately, I had the support of Carla Hain that is back here in the background, and she said, more. She said, they don't work hard enough. So I said, okay, I'll give them more. She said, not enough. But actually, beyond that advice, she is a source of enormous understanding about how these programs operate, these global immersion programs operate. And she constantly gave me really, really good ideas. So I basking in the happiness and the glow that I think these students are feeling about this event. But Carla deserves a substantial fraction of that adulation. But then the Greek experience, when you get in country, it's totally experience. It's not a lecture. It's like you're interviewing different people. There are people coming to their group. We started with the National Bank of Greece, and we had these McKinsey folks, and Microsoft incubator, and a private equity firm, and Gaia that makes olive. Event after event, which somebody's getting up and telling us about their view about what Greece is. The students are all prepared with really great questions. They go into Greece with the obligation to create an investment proposal for this distressed environment. So I've been reading, I actually read them all, the 38 investment ideas, very creative, very, very nice stuff. But the bottom line is, I've become a complete believer in this kind of education. I got to know these students, they got to know me. We had a kind of interaction that you wouldn't have elsewhere, in-country interaction. And it's an experience, not a lecture. It's an experience with tremendous amount of overload in terms of informational, but a real world experience that gets them much closer to what the kinds of problems will be when they actually get into the business world. So that's my story on global immersion programs.
So did Greece do the right thing in retrospect?
So what happened when they joined the EU and adopted the euro is that credit spreads on Greek sovereign debt dramatically reduced. So these high interest rates that the Greeks used to have to pay were reduced to basically a little more than German rates. So that's a huge benefit for a country. Just like right now, the municipalities can borrow at incredibly low interest rates. If our city government had any wisdom, they would be borrowing not to pay for pension costs, but to build the infrastructure that will grow the economy going forward. So Greece had an historic opportunity to acquire good debt. Good debt means you use that increase in indebtedness to make the investments, and those investments will allow you to service the debt and draw down the principal. The problem, which is very similar to our municipalities, is the debt is being used in Greece for current expenditures. So they had a history of clientism, very heavy dependence on the government. The best job in the Greek economy wasn't in the private sector, it was in the government. We heard case after case of examples of this. The one that stuck in my mind is that the accountants who work for the government in Greece get paid 3 times as much as the private sector accountants. And the Greeks, we tried to study the history of Greece and learned that it was an Ottoman era where that critical role of the government got created, because the Ottomans, rather than having an Ottoman local ruler, they would appoint a Greek as a pasha, who was the leader of that region. And that person's job was to make everybody happy. So if you lived in the area, you wanted to be the brother or the friend or the wife of the pasha.
Right, but you're answering...
Clientism, let me just continue. So I think if they had used the opportunity that was created by joining the EU and getting those incredible interest rates, if they had done it wisely, they would have done the reforms in the labor market, they would have cut back the size of their government, and they would have thought long and hard about what can make Greece really great a decade from now. And I think many of the students who were with me are thinking that the most important asset, this incredible tourism asset, which is underutilized, completely underutilized.
Right,
in
so
part because it's a brief season. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're answering future questions. So
Okay, sorry.
let's make this more of a dialogue.
Okay.
I know you can answer all the questions. So they did not use their, so by joining, what you're saying, borrowing costs just went way down. They were very high because Greece had its own Greek type of risks, and now they became borrowing costs like German, because now they were part of the same monetary system.
So
And they did not use that opportunity wisely.
So let me.
But separate. I still want you to answer the question of given that was not that surprising. Should they have adopted this? Because you talked about Mexico being able to devalue itself out. So you're saying the benefits of joining was that the cost of debt went down. That's the benefit of joining. The cost is that
the cost of acquiring more debt, accumulating debt.
Right, but the cost of becoming a member of the Eurozone is that you don't have your own currency.
Correct. Which
could change in value in order to accommodate these awful things. So should they have adopted the euro? You said the drachma now is not a bad idea, but if they hadn't adopted the euro, would they be better off?
So the business school students in microeconomics are supposed to learn elasticity. And I don't know how many of you learn that, but a price cut is going to increase the revenue of a firm when the demand curve is elastic. That's what you learn. Because a price cut means that on the marginal sale, on all the inframarginal sales, you're making less than you did before. You're selling at a lower price. The only way you can raise revenue is if you stimulate sales. So price cutting is appropriate in a setting in which you can stimulate sales. Mexico in 1994 had just joined NAFTA and was positioned to be a major exporter to the United States. And through price cutting, you accelerate that process of industrialization of the northern states of Mexico, and which is hugely beneficial for exports. But think about tourism. We've talked about this in class. I'm not sure we're really sure about this, but my sense is that the tourism demand is pretty inelastic, meaning that there's only so many hotel spots, so many beaches, so cutting price is not the good idea. So you want to do the opposite. Rather than adopt the drachma and cut price, you want to put a tax on.
So should they adopt the Swiss franc that is even stronger than the euro?
No, I think there's huge benefits from the common currency that will come along, but the additional benefit now, by the way, is that they have the Merkel running the Greek economy. They need a way to.
You think that's a benefit?
Yeah.
The whole Greek politics is that's a humiliation.
Yeah.
How can that be? Explain that to us. How come that the Greek people, by re-electing Tsipras as their prime minister, confirmed the view that having Madame Merkel, who is the Chancellor of Germany, run the Greek economy is a humiliation, and you are saying it's a great benefit. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, the economy needs reforms. There are huge inefficiencies that have been built up over the years, the way the government operates in Greece. They have a huge set of public servants. They have a huge problem with tax collection. They have something like 30% of people are self-employed, which is another way of saying tax evasion in the Greek economy. And they have the scheme that we learned about, which seemed a terrible thing, is that if you're a small enterprise, you don't pay taxes, but if you get to a certain level, then you have to start the tax burden. The whole system seems to be built not on growth, but on preventing growth. So they need a mechanism to change this. And they can't do it internally because, my mom and dad are working for the Greek government, and damn, you're not going to stop that from happening. Too many people are connected to that dole in order to vote for it.
But so we need the Germans to impose discipline.
We need the Germans, and that's exactly what Tsipras has done. He said, we're not going to do this, and we're going to have a vote. And the Greek citizens said, we're not going to go along with these reforms. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, he says, we're going to go ahead. So I think that getting the reforms in place and getting a growth-oriented aspect of that country is absolutely critical.
Let me ask you another question. You said that they were irresponsible in the way they handled the opportunity of borrowing at a much, just to give you an order of magnitude, the difference in the cost of borrowing in Greece before they joined the euro with respect to Germany was about 15 percentage points. So if the Germans were borrowing at 5%, Greece was borrowing at 20%. After the adoption of the euro, Greece could, for all practical purposes, borrow at the same rate as the Germans. Only about 20 basis points, so 0.2. So you said they were irresponsible. What about another interpretation? They were over-optimistic. And trying to link this with our event on Monday, the Olympics made them believe that they had already made it. They even quadrupled the number of Olympic medals that Greece had ever obtained. And they said, well, we are already there. We don't excessive optimism, which is something that maybe many times companies, firms, get into. Is that something that you guys thought about?
Well, I think more broadly, it's both. A bad debt is created by both lender and borrower. And both lender and borrower have to be very optimistic about default and delinquency risks in order to give the Greeks the same interest rates that the Germans did. So that collapse in the Greek, in the difference between the Greek interest rate and the German interest rate is saying most of that is currency risk. And hardly anything is about repayment risk. So the bond market completely forgot about repayment risk. So I really
you have a nice
that,
picture. You want to show that picture of the bond market?
Yeah, we could do that.
Why don't you show that one? This is very interesting.
Before I show this other slide, these are images of the Great Depression in the United States. I don't know if you've seen these images, but they're kind of burned in my eye about how bad the situation was with the soup lines and the poor woman, the Oklahoma woman taking care of the children. Terrible stories. So the data for the Greek economy is as bad or worse than the Great Depression. Can I show those?
Show them.
Okay. Okay, so this shows you what happened in the 2007 downturn in terms of GDP. The vertical line in the middle represents the cycle peak. So you're growing up to that point, then the GDP declines a little bit, and then it's up and running. So how much did the GDP...
This is the US, by the way.
That's the US in 2007. So how much, can you tell how much the GDP declined? 4%, 3 or 4%, something like that. So you get a sense of how, that was a terrible, the so-called Great Recession chopped off only about 3 or 4% of GDP. So then that's the Great Depression, where 1929 is the peak. So we lost 25% of GDP. And you get a pretty rapid recovery, like kind of rapid, like 7 years later, you're up and running. But this is way worse. So when we use the rhetoric about the Great Recession, the 2008-2009 downturn being the worst since the Great Depression, that's technically accurate, but rhetorically very misleading, because there's nothing like the Great Depression.
The green is like a Mickey Mouse recession, right? Yeah. I mean, compared to red. Red is a big bad wolf.
So there's Greece. And it threatens to sit there on the bottom. In terms of total percentage reduction, it's basically about the same amount. And it threatens to sit down there indefinitely. Indefinitely. So
so Warren Buffett says, I want to help the Greek economic turnaround. I'm going to go there and invest some of my money, but I'm not a fool, so I want to invest in promising sectors.
Well,
besides tourism and olive oil.
I should turn this over to some of my olive oil.
Olive oil and tourism. Is there anything else?
We have either into our students that they're all tourism. What did you do, Mark?
Medical tourism.
Oh, medical tourism. Yeah, we had a few medical. We had 38 great ideas. I don't remember them all. But
olive oil and tourism mostly.
But the thing that we did learn is that the private equity firm told us that now is not the time to invest in Greece, that you've got to see not a promise about making these reforms, which will turn the economy into a more growth-oriented economy. You've got to see real progress. You've got to see it occurring, not just a promise. Right. So we've got the Cyprus government that has promised to do these reforms, but until they do, Greece is going to sit down there in the bottom. So the second thing is you need the political system to stop looking backward and worrying about the negative things in the past and start looking forward, thinking about what will make Greece great again. And the tourism assets are going to be part of that story. But there's lots of other things that you could do in Greece as well. It's a potential logistics center because of its ideal location.
Location.
The unemployment rate is as bad as the Great Depression. Youth unemployment rate is, I forget what, 50%? How much? 60%. So I expected when we got to Greece there would be a horrible situation with lots of homeless people on the streets.
Like Los Angeles.
I bought these special pants that are pickpocket proof. That's why I was worried about the crime on the streets. And I didn't need them. There was no problem on the streets at all. All the time I was there, I saw one homeless person. I don't know whether the rest of the group saw much, but there's no evidence of this Great Depression on the streets of Athens. We were told the reason is that families are strong enough so they don't let their adult males in particular wander the street. They keep them inside of homes. In addition, they don't allow foreclosure. So if you own a home and you can't do the debt service, you just stay there. You might not have heat or light, but you can stay there indefinitely. This tends to reduce the number of people who are on the street. So Athens was a great tourist destination, even in the midst of this terrible crisis. It was just terrific. So here's the bond market. So these are interest rates on 10-year sovereign debt. And this is where the euro was created. And you can see what happened is the yields on, this is the BAA rate, US BAA rate. And compared to the US Treasury, there's a spread, meaning that there's a risk of default on the part of US corporations who issue near junk level bonds. And that's the spread that occurs for those. But there was a spread on Spanish and Italian bonds prior to them joining the euro, but it completely collapses. Can you see this? So joining the euro eliminated any special risk spread, apparently because the risk spread was all currency risk, due to currency risk.
No, they knew that the Germans were going to bail them
That
out.
could be too. That could be too.
Okay, so let me
That
ask you
didn't
the...
work. Wait, I got to do the Greek one too, just
Oh,
so to
okay.
see it. One more slide shows Greek. So this is the Greek spreads. So this is where the Greeks officially joined the euro, and there's a Greek spread. You can't see this. It looked like it's smaller because the scale on the left-hand side is different, but it's about a 5 percentage point spread relative to the U.S. The Greeks were borrowing at 10%, and just like you said, it collapses down by about 5 percentage points.
This is the part that is amazing, which
Yeah.
is that throughout this period, you see the light blue and the red lines are superimposed. So that means that the market did not actually differentiate between Greece as a borrower and Germany.
Until right here.
Until
boom,
right, like, look at
it goes like crazy.
Okay, so let me
So
ask
this
a
is
last-
I'm just saying, this is a complete failure of the bond market to recognize the risk of the Greek borrowing. Just like the subprime lending, the same thing in the United States. There's no awareness of what that subprime loans would
Now,
produce.
if they had taken our courses, the investors around here, they would have short the Greek bond market.
True.
And they would have become very wealthy. And
Yeah,
some did.
absolutely.
Those that were not that were awake when we were teaching this stuff, right? So let me ask you a last question before we have dinner. You said that one of the way outs is an internal devaluation, which is the sort of sugar-coated way of saying, let's cut wages big time. And
Yeah.
you said already they've cut 25%, but that's not enough. So the Greek people are complaining and are unhappy, and because of course wages have gone down by 25% and they have to go down by another 25%. What about instead of that just defaulting on the debt? I mean, you're saying they have to cut wages so that they can generate a surplus in order to pay the debt.
Yeah.
What about if they say, you know what, it was your fault, you should have known us, we've always been the same way, and you lent us this money at this ridiculously low rate, now we're not going to pay. What's
Well,
wrong with that?
This debt is constantly rolling over. So if the Germans don't continue to offset the reduction in the debt as it rolls over when it matures, you got to find that money somewhere else.
No, you just don't pay. You just you do an Argentine type of thing, which is Argentina did it very recently. We for every dollar that we owe, we're going to pay 23 cents. That's what Argentina did, and they still get to the final of the World Cup and all of that. Right?
So I'm going to ask the expert to answer this question, because we read that paper of yours about why the adopting the drachma would open up tremendous contractual issues that would be hard for the courts to deal with. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, I mean, you're putting me. No, what happened in Argentina? What happens now if you go the default way is that there is infinite litigation. This is where the law students here know all about it. But this litigation is not in domestic courts. It is in international court. And in fact, given the EU judicial system, all of this will go to Brussels. And in Brussels, there's going to be a panel of international judges that are not going to be particularly sympathetic towards the Greek government unilaterally restructuring the debt. So it's going to drag on forever and ever. And the cost to Argentina of doing what they did is, which they did in 2001, is that they still cannot get back to the international capital market. And now they have an incredible system in Argentina. Anyone from Argentina here? An incredible system of controls, and there is black market for foreign currency, and the official price of the dollar is 1/2 of the market price in Argentina. So, and unless they resolve their judicial problems that they have, they will not be able to ever borrow again, and that's hurting the economy.
I learned a lot, but the one thing I learned about was the inappropriateness of the fixed income contract. I used to always think that And buying an equity was a peculiar thing because there was no real contract there. You relied on the ability to sell it to somebody else. Maybe you got some voting rights over the firm, but nobody's going to really listen to you. So when you bought that equity, you relied on somebody else buying it from you at some point, hopefully at a higher price. Whereas a bond was a real contract, a contract that involved a promise to pay. So I always thought that was a better way of carrying out these kind of lending opportunities. But as I've studied in this course, I realized fixed income is great for the lender, but fixed payments are a disaster for the borrower. Because when the recession comes, two things happen that make it very hard to continue the fixed payments. One is that the revenues tend to get weak, so your your income falls, so your ability to pay the interest charges declines. And secondly, you might like to get out from under the debt by selling the assets, but typically the asset values fall as well during recessions. So you're stuck with an impossible situation as a borrower. And we kind of know that the subprime loans were a disaster for both those reasons, that the homeowners had a hard time doing a debt service because they lost their jobs, and they couldn't get out from under the debt by selling off their homes because most of the homes were underwater. They were worth less than the outstanding mortgage. In that case, with non-recourse loans, they just turned it over to the banks. And banks, because of accounting rules, have to get it off their books quickly. So they sold all those properties very rapidly. You had a huge decline in prices because of the distressed sales. And that was really what 2008, 2009 was all about. And then it was those what are relatively small, like a $5 trillion problem, was multiplied by 10 or more with all the credit default swaps and the mortgage-backed securities that were on all the balance sheets of the financial system. So in thinking back on this, let's think about Greece. Greece is obligated to pay a fixed interest rate, but why isn't that contingent on the level of GDP growth?
So the question is, what kind of contracts?
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask them what kind of contract, but I just want to think about it first with regard to the Greece borrowing. And remember, the Germans are giving the lending, so the idea is that there ought to be a contract that aligns the interests of the borrower and the lender. And if you have a contract that's contingent on GDP growth, the Germans are rooting for Greek GDP growth, and the Greeks are rooting for Greek GDP growth, because the Germans are happy.
That's not called debt. That's called equity.
It's an equity aspect to the debt contract. So my
let
view is.
Let me ask you, would you then lengthen, if GDP grows more slowly, in your scheme, Greece or whoever the sovereign is would pay less? In your scheme, would that mean that they would have to pay for a longer period of time to make up for the lower payments, or just pay less?
No, that could be. You'd have to think about what the ideal contract could be. It could be affecting the outstanding capital, or it could be just the whole history.
Why don't we have some questions from the audience before you pose the final question for the dinner?
But so think about this: what's the ideal contract that Greece and Germany should get into? A contract that's going to work for both parties.
So now you have a wonderful opportunity to ask questions to Professor Leamer. I'm going to have Alexandra ask the first one.
What about debt forgiveness? That has been tossed around as an idea, right? It's like, and the Germans oppose it more than anybody else. The IMF has sort of postured, I guess, behind German resistance that they would be willing to do it. France has pushed for it. Why not?
Well, I'm a big believer that bad debt is created by both lender and borrower, and both should bear the consequence of that bad debt. But here in this country, who do we bail out? We don't bail out the homeowners. We bail out the banking system and the lenders. That's been the tradition all the time. But I definitely think that the Germans and the other lenders that contribute to this problem by not being aware of the risk, they should take a haircut. Absolutely. I have no question about that. And that's what in a way, rather than kind of renegotiate the contract, I'd rather have the haircut built into the original contract, have a GDP growth contingency in the contract, so that the haircut would be automatic depending upon the circumstances in the Greek economy.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
I just have a question about, from an economics theory perspective. I wonder what's your opinion on this discussion that was going on recently in Europe about is the way Germany proposes what Greece should do to reorganize effectively, is that a right way in your opinion? Because there were some very popular American economists that also had a word in that discussion and that totally were against this austerity politics.
Are you talking about the reforms of the labor market?
No,
or-
austerity.
Austerity.
Oh, austerity.
Fiscal, yeah. So I think it's either she's talking either about Joe Stiglitz or Paul
Oh, yeah.
Krugman, or Joe Krugman or Paul Stiglitz, or any combination of the two.
Well, this goes back to the same point, which is that in a period of financial downturn, well, actually, it's true in the state of California too. I told the governor the time to cut the public payrolls is not when the private payrolls are weak, not in the middle of recession. It's when the economy is strong. So the governor, has to be tough, because when the revenues are flowing in up there in Sacramento, both sides of the aisle want to spend that in one way or the other, either with a tax cut or a spending increase, and give it away. That's the time to do your budget cuts and do your reductions in the workforce. That's the same thing is true in Greece, which is it's a terrible time to, as much as you have excess workers on the government payroll, you're not benefiting by creating a whole lot of unemployment. That's the negative about austerity. But on the other hand, the Greece economy has been so badly managed for so long. Just something has to be done in order to get that on the right path.
So let me expand and try to connect that with what Alexandra asked. What Ed said is exactly true, which is that during downturn, you want the public sector to be stronger and sort of to step into the private sector's shoes. But in order for that to happen, during the good times, the public sector must have retrenched, so it has some borrowing capacity. And the problem is that during the good time, the Greek borrowed, and when the bad times came, there is no room for the public sector to step in. So the only way to do it is it's through either debt default, which, as I said, rules out borrowing more. So you cannot do it. Then all that is left is debt forgiveness. So the real, as Ed was saying, the real lesson here is that during the good times, you have to be very austere and create a cushion during the good times that you can actually use during the bad times. More questions? Yes, over here.
Thank you for your extraordinary talk tonight. And I have two questions. One question is, at the legal technical level, is there any formal or informal legal framework is effective to solve the Greece debt crisis? And the second question is, suppose there is informal or formal legal framework here, does it help to decrease the rate of Greece to the normal level? Thank you.
So do you know about the formal
No,
inside the EU?
I'm not sure about the details, but I have one big thought, which is, and again it's related to the previous two questions and to what Ed was saying. When you get into these very difficult situations, you want to have a legal framework that would make it easy to restructure the debt, to have some kind of debt workout. If the contract, as Ed is proposing, does not automatically have into it this adjustable payments, you want to solve the problem. And the question is, how do you restructure the debt? How do you deal with that? Do you have to get agreement by how many of the lenders? And there are legal proposals out there that would have in the bonds some covenants that would allow for just a majority, a small majority of bondholders would have to agree in order to restructure the debt. That's a very, very deep discussion that continues to go on, and governments have opposed it throughout. They don't want. They are called collective action clauses, and what they do is that they add the legal right that 51% of bondholders decide, yes, we're going to restructure, and the other 49 cannot block the restructuring of the debt. It's like a Chapter 11 of sorts, and that's part of the discussion, and it's going on, and the Germans are standing on the way. Okay, so Ed, why don't you ask the questions, the exact or precise? Were you going to ask one or two questions for the tables?
You said I needed two, but
Two.
I could do with one.
Okay, so this is a question that the tables during dinner have to discuss, and you also have to assign a spokesperson that is going to then tell us what the table decided.
Yeah, I want each table to think about two different kinds of debt contracts that some of you are already involved in and most of you will be involved in, to talk about how they can be made contingent on circumstances that would be that would be wise for both lender and borrower. The one contract is the student debt, and what contingencies are appropriate in the student debt arena. The other one is the housing debt.
So student debt right now, it's fixed maturity, fixed interest rate, and then payments are due, and you have to pay them unless under some extraordinary circumstances, like you're in Teach for America or something like that.
I don't know. Yeah, that's true.
Right. So, but it's fixed maturity and fixed interest rate, and you want them
And no
to
escape.
think of alternative contingent ways of doing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the same thing with regard to housing. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the housing crisis in 2007, 8, 9, well, 6, 7, 8, 9. The question is, are there contracts that would have more quickly dealt with the crisis, or would have prevented it from occurring because the excesses of borrowing and lending would not have occurred with you had these other kinds of contracts?
Okay.
Yeah,
So
working on that?
that's great. So let me pose it in a sort of fun way, if this is fun. I don't know if it's fun. So let's assume that you are hired by a financial institution, and each table is you are the senior partners of this consulting firm, and the assignment is we want to think of a new debt product that would be very attractive because it would allow student loan to be more flexible, more friendly, but at the end we also want to make some money. You have to design a new product, which means a new contract. Is that more or less
correct.
it? Yeah.
And you
So
should
you're
think
being
about,
hired by a financial institution. You have to do it. Think of it as if this is for a bank or a financial house.
So it's a kind of insurance policy that you're trying to design here, contingent on things that may occur. Now, when you design insurance, you have to worry about moral hazard. So an example of moral hazard is if I get an automobile insurance, I tend to drive in a more risky way and increase the risk that there's going to be accidents. So whatever contract you create, you got to worry about the moral hazard aspect of it. And then the other one is self-selection. You don't want people to easily select out of these contracts. So, but the goal is to get something that would align the lender and the borrower with regard to student loans, and something that would align the lender and the borrower with regard to housing debt.